Welcome to this forum on the Chinese Communist Party's transnational repression on American soil. We're going to start the forum with a quick welcome from the Epoch Times CEO, Janice Trey. We'll get Janice to give the welcome in a moment. I'm going to pass the mic now to Piero Tozzi, who is the Staff Director of the Congressional Executive Commission on China, and he's here. The co-chair, Chris Smith, was going to give opening remarks, but Piero is actually going to deliver in lieu. And I might mention that Piero has been a huge champion for the rights of persecuted Chinese for a very long time. It's a pleasure and honor to have you here, Piero.
Well, thank you, Jan, and thank you for holding this very important event, which will feature Professor Yan Hongbing, and also thank you for inviting me to speak on Congressman Smith's behalf. He's the co-chair, as mentioned, of the Congressional Executive Commission on China. This week, we commemorate the Tiananmen Massacre of 1989. For those of you that don't know him, Professor Yuan, who you will hear from, is a man of many talents whose writing ranges from literature to philosophy. And his role in the history of Tiananmen was organizing as a law professor the Beijing University Faculty Support Association in solidarity with the brave student protesters who gathered on the square and on campuses to press for democracy. He's lived the past 20 years in exile. So it's really an honor to share time with this brave man. The PRC's blatant campaign and the CCP's blatant campaign of transnational repression has been a focus of Congressman Smith and of mine as well for years. And despite the attempts of us and our colleagues to draw more attention to the issue, the CCP's campaign against anyone who dares speak out against them from abroad, including in the United States, and continues unabated. In fact, the CCP's regime of repression beyond China's borders has only increased, even here on U.S. soil, and it continues to target Falun Gong practitioners and fellow democracy advocates. Many here in this room, unfortunately, are familiar with the tactics that the CCP uses to target individuals and groups, and in particular adherence to Falun Gong. Even the most peaceful demonstrations of freedom of expression have been targeted, including the Shen Yun performing arts shows around the world. Shen Yun, which holds a noble mission of, quote, showing China before communism, unquote, and reviving traditional Chinese culture, has been relentlessly targeted by the Chinese government for its religiosity and depiction of the CCP's historic campaign of cruelty and violence against peaceful practitioners of Falun Dafa. The CCP has targeted Shen Yun hundreds of times since its inception in 2006 through threatening performance spaces that host them, sponsors that support them, and even performers and their family members in China. In recent years, there's been an uptick in threats, even right here in Washington, D.C., as evidenced by a bomb threat called into the Kennedy Center this year in advance of the Shen Yun performance. This is in addition to the sudden barrage of bomb and death threats received earlier this year, not only by Shen Yun performers, but also Falun Gong practitioners, and directed at members of Congress who are supportive of Falun Gong as well. The CCP, though, as we know, targets more than just Falun Gong practitioners. This year alone, we've seen reports of lawfare, social media harassment, cyber hacking, and physical threats against democracy advocates around the world, including in the United States. The CCP targets Hong Kongers, Uyghurs, Tibetans, and even those who just seek to use their voices to speak out peacefully against the atrocities being committed by the CCP. Perhaps the most egregious example of transnational repression by the PRC that we've seen to date in America was that of the attacks on peaceful protesters at the 2023 APEC summit in San Francisco. Leading up to and during the summit, activists speaking out against Xi Jinping and the CCP were met with intense harassment, threats, and even violence. Some were attacked with flagpoles and chemical spray, had their phones stolen and destroyed, or were physically assaulted. The Washington Post, doing excellent reporting, revealed how officials from the Chinese consulates in San Francisco and Los Angeles helped choreograph the mayhem. All through it, the San Francisco Police Department took almost no action to intervene. These peaceful protesters exercising their First Amendment right to peaceably assemble were attacked in open daylight, the assaults captured on video, and again, given almost no protection. Mr. Smith, as chairman of the Congressional Executive Commission on China, held a press conference to highlight the victims of these attacks in December of 2023, and he wrote a letter with his co-chair, Senator Jeff Merkley, to then Attorney General Merrick Garland, demanding an additional investigation into the violence. The response was somewhat tepid. They said that it's an ongoing investigation, so they're not going to comment on it. U.S. federal authorities do appear to be taking more action in response to some of these threats after much time has passed, but still much more needs to be done. 2 men were recently arrested in Serbia for coordinating the harassment, intimidation, and threatening of a protester at the APEC summit. In another case this year, the Department of Justice arrested and convicted 2 men for acting as illegal agents of the PRC government and for bribing the IRS to strip Shen Yun's tax-exempt status. The DOJ this year also brought charges against a telecom worker who was sentenced in Florida to 48 months in prison for conspiring to act as an agent of the PRC through collection and sharing of information about Falun Gong practitioners here in the U.S. with China's Ministry of State Security. I strongly condone steps to provide justice for the global victims of the CCP's repressive regime, just as much as I condemn the actions of the CCP. But much more needs to be done to prevent further harassment and violence. Congressman Smith, along with colleagues in the Senate, previously introduced the Transnational Repression Policy Act in the hope that it can hold foreign governments, and particularly that of China, accountable for their actions, and they intend to do so as well. There needs to be accountability. Justice delayed is justice denied. Thank you very much.
Piero, thank you very much. At this point, I'd like to invite for the welcome remarks Epoch Times CEO Janice Trey.
Welcome, everyone. Distinguished speakers and guests here today. We gather here at U.S. Congress for a vital forum exposing the Chinese Communist Party's transnational repression on American soil and urgent threat to democratic value, free speech, and the rule of law. First, look at the Communist visions, a global challenge. At Beijing's Tiananmen Square, next to Mao Zedong's portraits, you see the slogan, "Long live the great unity of the world's peoples," and Xi Jinping's community of shared human destiny repackaged these ideologies. So you can see from Mao to Xi, the CCP has pursued the disruption of the US-led post-World War II democratic order, not through conventional warfare, but via covert influence, subversion, and exploitations of open societies. In fact, this is a playbook of infiltration. The CCP's triumph in Chinese Civil War in 1948 to 1949, despite being outnumbered and outgunned by the nationalist Kuomintang, the CCP's expertise in infiltrations, espionage, and psychological warfare helped it win. So these tactics have defined CCP's global strategy for more than 7 decades. We look at today. The CCP attacked the U.S. and Taiwan. They applied the same subversive tactics against Taiwan and U.S., infiltrating various institutions, manipulating decision-making process, and fueling divisions. It specifically targets global insurance entities such as the Epoch Times and Shen Yun Performing Arts, organizations that openly expose the CCP's human rights abuses and ideological repressions, and both try to revive the traditional cultures, pre-communism. Let's look at the resistance, Falun Gong's response Truth as Resistance. In 1999, the CCP launched a nationwide campaign to eradicate Falun Gong, a peaceful spiritual practice rooted in meditation and moral teachings based on truth, compassion, forbearance. Using its full-scale state apparatus, military, police, judiciary, and propaganda organs, the regimes engaged in systematic arrest, torture, and defamation. Falun Gong responded with non-violence resistance and global truth-tellings. You may wonder why they persecuted Falun Gong, such a peaceful group based on truth, compassion, forbearance. There were over 100 million people in China practice Falun Gong. Do you know how many Chinese Communist Party members? 60 million. However, truth, compassion, tolerance, people want to be good citizens and healthy as they are apolitical, but the CCP leaders are never elected. It's their own fears. They see it as a threat, and they use the entire apparatus to persecute Falun Gong. Instead, Falun Gong launched the longest and the largest nonviolence resistance. And Falun Gong practitioners have founded the Epoch Times 24 plus years ago. And today the Epoch Times, reach millions of audience in 35 countries, 23 languages. And in 2004, published the 9 commentaries of the Communist Party, and this sparked the global Quit the CCP movement, which has seen over 447.2 million people renounce their affiliations to the Chinese Communist Party, the youth leads, and the young pioneers. Its follow-up series, The Spectre of Communism is Ruling Our World, exposed how communist ideology has infiltrated nearly every facet of the Western society under various guises. And Shen Yun Performing Arts revives the traditional Chinese culture on a global stage, presenting a vision of China untainted by the communist ideology. And all these efforts resonates worldwide and have become central to countering the CCP's regime's disinformation campaigns. Let's look at how CCP weaponizes the U.S. institutions. Beyond traditional espionage, the CCP now manipulates American legal and administrative system to suppress dissent. Through lawsuits, regulatory complaints, and bureaucratic pressure, the CCP, through its proxies, seeks to drain the resources of Falun Gong-affiliated groups. Even when such cases are dismissed, the CCP's proxy amplify them through propaganda, causing reputational harm regardless of the legal outcomes. Let's look at 2 case studies. The John Chen case in 2022 and 23, U.S. citizen John Chen and associate Ling Feng, both linked to the CCP's notorious 610 office, attempted to bribe an IRS official to revoke Shen Yun's nonprofit status. Chen later pleaded guilty to acting as an unregistered agent for the CCP, and court documents reveal he received over $52,000 per month from the CCP. And the Alex Sklar case in 2023 in New York, Alex Sklar filed baseless environmental lawsuit against Dragon Spring Temple, the headquarters of where many Falun Gong practitioners are located, and conducts surveillance on practitioners. A federal judge dismissed the lawsuit as meritless and barred Scalia from refiling. All these cases illustrate how the CCPs leverage American institutions, including the IRS, Department of Labor, and state regulators, to wage lawfare, harass people, and exhaust their resources over years of litigations. Let's look at the media manipulation, co-opting media outlets in the West. The CCP allocates over $7 billion annually to global propaganda, including efforts to influence Western media. In December 2024, the New York Times published a piece accusing Shen Yun of amassing wealth, echoing CCP's propaganda, despite Shen Yun being a non-profit status. and legal scholar Yuan Hongbin and others have argued that such reports rely on CCP's orchestrated whistleblowers who operate freely in China and impossibility for real descendants. By ravaging the credibility of Western media outlets, the CCP attempt to discredit voices like the Epoch Times and neutralizes platforms that expose CCP's regime's crimes against humanity. To conclude, the CCP's transnational repression campaign is not merely an attack on Falun Gong, the Epoch Times, or Shen Yun. It is a direct challenge to the foundation of democratic society, as this tactic threatens free speech, religious liberty, and national security. By co-opting legal system, legal legacy media institution, and regulatory agency, the CCP seeks to silence dissents and reshape global opinion, just as it once subverted the nationalists Kuomintang in China. To counter this silent war, the U.S. must act decisively on 4 fronts. First, enforce and strengthen foreign agent registration laws. Second, require media outlets and policymakers to disclose any affiliations with foreign adversaries. Third, shield institutions from foreign influence and regulatory abuse. Fourth, support independent media and traditional value-based civil organizations. Falun Gong's commitments to nonviolence and truth underscore what is at stake. Defending their rights is not just a moral imperative. It is a defense of freedom itself. Thank you.
So I have a habit when I moderate these forums of not introducing myself, so I'm going to do that right now. I'm Jan Jekielek, the senior editor at the Epoch Times. And I'm going to introduce someone right now who isn't with us physically. He's dialing in to us from Taiwan, and he was mentioned already a couple of times in both of the introductory speeches we had, and that's the renowned Chinese-Australian scholar, novelist, and Chinese dissident Yuan Hongbin. Now, the thing that he has is an extensive network of people highly positioned in the Chinese Communist Party who are communicating with him a lot of insider information. And we at the Epoch Times, I'm looking back perhaps to 2 years ago, we noticed sort of a lot more this transnational repression stuff activity happening, whether it be cyber attacks or, basically our reporters being squelched or attempts at, preventing us from getting advertising. There's all sorts of things. Well, he discovered something astonishing, which is that this is actually a coordinated campaign, an escalation of transnational repression. But I'm going to let him talk about that, and he's going to appear to us up here on the screen. And because of his time, he's dialing in the middle of the night. We're going to give him time, and we'll do a brief Q&A immediately after that, so we can actually let him go, and we'll continue on with the conference. So let's bring on Yuan Hongbin.
中共暴政对法轮功精神信仰团体所进行的大迫害
Hello everyone. The Chinese Communist Party's systematic persecution against Falun Gong is the most tragic, one of the most tragic humanitarian crises happening in East Asia in the 21st century. Falun Gong practitioners' brave yet tragic efforts against the persecution, striving for religious freedom, is becoming one of the most influential movements in modern China. Falun Gong practitioners pushing for the spread of the Nine Commentary, as well as its efforts to tell the truth, is convincingly exposing the Chinese Communist regime's evil nature, which is anti-humanitarian and anti-freedom. Falun Gong practitioners initiated the campaign to have people renounce their membership of the CCP as well as its affiliated organization. It is a great uprising against the Chinese Communist regime. Jiang Zemin once mobilized the entire Chinese Communist state apparatus, vowing to completely annihilate Falun Gong. But quite the contrary, the power of faith and spirituality far surpasses the power of the state apparatus. Today, Falun Gong is not only not being annihilated, quite the contrary, they're becoming stronger day by day. The media organizations created by Falun Gong practitioners are becoming the largest scale of any media organization for the Chinese people. It is also helping the Western society to fully understand the CCP's anti-humanitarian nature. Media outlets created by Falun Gong practitioners are becoming irreplaceable. Their pursuit for spirituality and the organizations they created, such as Shen Yun, are also thriving. All of these are naturally triggering the CCP's extreme hatred and fear for Falun Gong. Prior to the 20 National Congress in China, Xi Jinping held a secret meeting. He mentioned about Falun Gong's development outside of China and his plan to initiate another round of persecution outside of China. According to reports, the CCP's tactic can be summed up to one central focus and two directives. The one central focus is mainly targeting the founder of Falun Gong practitioner, the founder of Falun Gong, targeting his character, assassinate his character, in Xi Jinping's own words, is to spiritually destroy Falun Gong, and is the very foundation of his existence. And the two basic directions include information warfare and legal warfare. So the so-called information warfare is to mobilize the mainstream media in Western society, using defamation, lies, and many other tactics to strike on all fronts against Falun Gong and disrupt the influence of Falun Gong practitioners in international society, and also providing false information to key personnel. And the ultimate goal is to destroy media outlets founded by Falun Gong practitioners. The CCP's communist regime, one of the main tactics they employed to infiltrate mainstream media in the West, they're using the greedy nature of the human nature, using all different bribery, forcing these media to publish articles that are designed to attack Falun Gong practitioners, provided by the CCP's proxies. And also they're trying to mobilize the Western legal system against the founder of Falun Gong and Shen Yun Performing Arts, as well as other media and other organizations created by Falun Gong practitioners, suing them and also using false accusations, trying to use this legal procedure, using false accusations to destroy the reputation of Falun Gong and to destroy the facade of Falun Gong practitioners. And they're also trying to drag on the legal process and try to waste their time, efforts, and money. So whether it's information warfare or legal warfare, it is showing that the CCP regime is trying to use this United Front Work Department, using the legal system in the West as well as the media outlets to complete its conspiracy against Falun Gong. The CCP's persecution against Falun Gong outside of China is mostly coordinated by the Ministry of State Security. But all of these legal warfare and information warfare are essentially under the directive of Chen Yixin, who is the head of the Ministry of State Security. He said it himself that the CCP will use the CCP is going to use the Western society's legal and democratic system against Falun Gong. I would like to use this opportunity to emphasize that the CCP's regime's legal warfare and information warfare against Falun Gong are not isolated incidents. It is only a component of the CCP's actions against the United States. From government officials to their relatives, to people in the private sectors, to celebrities, to intellectuals, from editor-in-chiefs in media to scientists, the Chinese Communist Party's United Front work is infiltrating every corner of the United States. And the tactics they're employing are, of course, includes bribery and many others. But after the 20th National Congress, under Xi Jinping's leadership, the CCP's tactic, the CCP's United Front work effort in the United States has undergone a major change. Prior to this, the main goal of the United Front Work Department was to strengthen the influence of communist culture and infiltration in the United States, and stealing military and other intellectual property, as well as collecting data on citizens. And now the CCP's main strategic goal has already changed to, after a potential war between China and Taiwan, if America is to get involved militarily, they will mobilize all of its United Front efforts that was previously laid out in the West, trying to trigger an anti-war movement here in the United States, and to completely disintegrate the efforts to protect a free and democratic Taiwan. According to some relatives of the CCP officials, in April of 2023, the head of the Chinese military, under Xi Jinping's directive, made one plan: They're trying to send 80,000 people, and these are all veterans. They're trying to illegally enter the United States through Mexico, through the U.S.-Mexico border during peacetime under the identity of a civilian, try to live a normal life. But if a war breaks out between the United States and China over Taiwan, these people will start its own guerrilla warfare in the United States and to strike against all strategic goals laid out by the United States. And of course, under President Trump's policy against illegal immigration, China's military committee's conspiracy has already been defeated in some way. But the CCP's United Front work here in the United States has not stopped. They're going to use other tactics, and it's going to get worse in the future. An ancient Greek philosopher said, a drop of water is a component of an entire ocean. The CCP regime's legal warfare and information warfare against the Falun Gong practitioners here in the United States, the CCP's United Front Work Department is already becoming a severe threat to America's national security. Thank you very much.
So, thank you very much, Professor袁紅冰. If you have a question, if you could please come up to the microphone in the middle. We can also take a question from the dais here, if people aren't rushing up to the mic there. Otherwise, we will continue on to our next speaker. Dr. Terri Marsh.
Yeah, thank you. Thank you for that highly enlightening report, presentation. So my question is whether you have any evidence as to the connections between the United Front or some other component of the party and mainstream media in the United States, the New York Times in particular, and or the prosecutors prosecuting cases currently.
So everyone knows the CCP's regime, they're an extremely brutal authoritarian regime. So a lot of the people of conscience within the CCP, they're under great risk to be able to deliver truth to the public. So my main sources of information are mostly from my students. I taught in Peking University as well as Guizhou University when I was a teacher back then. I knew about 1,000 college students. I also taught law in Peking University. I was one of the main professors who taught law in Peking University. I was also in charge of writing the curriculum as well. So at the time, the law professions in Peking University had ties with the Chinese Communist Party. So some of the study programs, I was one of the main instructor. I was also one of the main writer of the curriculum. At the same time, the law profession at the Peking University, also held a tutorial for high-level justices. So in short, a lot of my students, I have probably about hundreds of thousands of students at this point now. They're embedded within all fabrics of the CCP's state apparatus. A lot of them are now very much enraged by Xi Jinping's authoritarian policies. So they're trying to get their words out, try to express their pursuit for freedom and democracy. So the Chinese Communist Party is employing high-tech methods to control the spread of these information. So the passing along of these information, we have to use the most conventional method. We don't use any modern technology to pass these messages. So my sources of information, that's all I can tell you. And I can only stop right here, and the goal is to protect the safety of where these information come from. Thank you.
And Piero, you have a question, I think.
I do. One often hears the narrative that Xi Jinping upended the reform process in China, and that had things continued along a trajectory, there would have been change. But I guess the question is the nature of the regime any different? Is it just a question of degree of oppression? And one looks at, for example, the persecution of the Falun Gong that really began in the Jiang Zemin reform era. So maybe you could address, is it a question of is the regime any different now in terms of its nature compared to the reform era, or is it just a question of difference of degree? Thank you.
So the Chinese Communist regime, under Deng Xiaoping's leadership, as well as Jiang Zemin's leadership and Hu Jintao's leadership, they're utilizing the oligarchy of, which is basically composed of all of the CCP relatives connection. So the highest position of power were basically under the control of all the CCP high-ranking officials and their families. And now, under Xi Jinping, he is trying to trigger the old way under Mao. So basically, the political and economic trajectory now is to go back to the same kind of political system under Mao. In China, Xi Jinping is trying to become a communist emperor. Yet in international society, at the same time, he is trying to put forth an expansionist policy all over the world. And the end goal is to achieve what he calls the East rises and the West falls. And in his, according to Xi, the goal is to replace the United States and become the one who sets the rules for the global stage. And the Xi Jinping's in both domestic and international trajectory is to restart the evil communist agenda. And that is precisely why the CCP is an enemy of the world. And they're also becoming one of the main source of all unstable forces in the world right now, in times of conflict.
And we'll take one more question from John Suarez.
I wanted to, you spoke of bribery and greed, and I'm thinking back to the beginning in the 1990s with the internet and the role that Western firms played in erecting the Great Firewall, the Golden Shield. Could you tell us a little more about, because we're talking about transnational repression, but I think it goes in more than one direction. You had a case where Western companies were assisting the communist dictatorship in China to improve its repression against the Chinese people. Could you expound on that a little bit, please? Thank you.
就是西方的这些公司在中国的对人权的有什么影响？可以讲话了。
就是在过去的几十年间啊
So in the past several decades,
在一些西方的政府啊，在
some Western governments, under the
影响之下
guidance of the
中共暴政
left-wing
采
ideology,
取的是姑息养奸的绥靖主义。
so basically they're just kind of letting them go.
姑息养奸的绥靖主义呢
And this kind of policy
使中共暴政啊获得了
has
爆发式
made the CCP obtain.
战略机遇期。
So basically that fostered the explosive growth of the CCP. And
世界第二大的经济体。
today they have already become the world's second largest economy. And
和国际的
the tens of thousands of CCP officials
邪恶的同盟，
have aligned,
也就是国际
they have formed an evil alliance with the international capitals.
在任何其他地方都不可能获得的暴利。
So a lot of these people can obtain the kind of wealth they won't obtain from anywhere else except for China. But these wealth are built on the back of Chinese people who are suffering, as well as the CCP's disruption of China's environment.
国际的资本曾经结成过这种邪恶的联盟。
So here, this is the evil alliance between China and the Western business world. And the rise of President Trump is now stopping the CCP. This is now trying to reverse this trend. But in the last several decades, the alliance between the CCP and the business sector outside of China, of course, it is still very much a problem today.
Well, Professor Yuan Hongbing, thank you so much for joining us, taking a little bit of time in the middle of the night, and we'll now continue with the rest of the forum.
Thank you.
Next, I'd like to invite to speak Dr. Eric Patterson, the President and CEO of the Victims of Communism Memorial Foundation, and I might also add a very powerful, decades-long advocate for religious freedom.
Thank you. It's a pleasure to be here with you today. Again, my name is Eric Patterson. I serve as President and CEO of the Victims of Communism Memorial Foundation here in Washington. I invite you, if you haven't, to come visit our museum by the White House that's open Tuesdays to Saturdays. VOC was founded in 1993 by a unanimous act of Congress and signed into law by Bill Clinton later that year with a purpose to remember the 100 million men, women, and children murdered by communism in the past, and to stand as we are today as a witness and an advocate for the liberty of those still held captive by totalitarian regimes. One thing that strikes me as I look around the room is that I see people from Cuba, Cuban Americans. I see people whose families came from Eastern Europe, and I see people from across East Asia, all committed to this vision, a vision of a freer world and the end of Chinese communism. To that end, I'd like to invite you. Many of you know that we hold an annual China Forum. It will be held on October 28th this year, right here on Capitol Hill. Well, our topic today, of course, is transnational repression. And this is a painfully real, ongoing crisis as the Chinese Communist Party and its minions act outside of China's borders to harass, intimidate, coerce, and use violence against critics, dissidents, and those who simply refuse to conform. I'd like to remind us of a couple of recent examples of such tactics that have occurred against people of faith in other contexts. And I know that on these two stories that I'll tell, that people like Chris Smith and his team and people in the civil society sector worked very hard to intervene. Let me just emphasize before I tell these two religious persecution stories that what we're talking about is transnational repression by the Chinese government acting outside of China, and in particular, in the stories that I'll tell, trying to bribe, coerce, intimidate, bully, etc., local government officials. So one example of this, of course, just from this year, as reported in March of earlier this year by Radio Free Asia and by Christian Solidarity Worldwide, was that the Thai government arrested over 60 Montagnard Christians from Vietnam and threatened to send them home, and then deported 40 Muslim Uyghurs to China. The second half of that story was often lost in the reporting about the Vietnam part of the case. But as many of you know, this is a group of Uyghurs who had left China seeking freedom a decade ago and have bounced around. Over 100 of them ended up in Turkey, where they faced additional harassment. That's one case just from the last 2 months. Another well-known case, of course, is that of Shenzhen Holy Reformed Church, which we often call the Mayflower Church, which escaped harsh persecution, interrogations, and imprisonment at the hands of the CCP in China. As many of you know, 60 members of the church fled to South Korea in 2019, but due to tremendous pressure by Beijing, they were not allowed to stay. They could not achieve legal status, and so they moved and sought refugee status in Thailand. Let me quote to you from the Associated Press story on this specific instance, because it encapsulates what we've seen happen in so many countries around the world. Quote, "They've been stalked, harassed, and received threatening calls and messages despite fleeing hundreds of miles away. Relatives back in China have been summoned, interrogated, and intimidated. In one case, Chinese diplomats refused to issue a member's newborn child a passport, rendering the baby stateless." And I bet if we were to ask the people who are gathered in this room today, have you had friends or colleagues or family members who've had this happen to them? I bet we'd see many hands raised. Now, there's a happy ending in this specific story, that despite the pressure on the Thai government, despite the pressure on the South Korean government before that, and due to the extraordinary efforts of members of Congress, some of the members of the VOC Congressional Caucus, the great work of Bob Fu from China Aid and David Trimble from the Religious Freedom Institute, we did see those people finally make it to the United States. But you think about the tremendous expense, the time, the pressure on those families and what it took to get them here. And you think about the many, many thousands of people who do not have those opportunities. Of course, we know that the repressive cases right here in the United States and across the West happen every day. An example comes from the 2024 Brookings Institution report that reported on the 102 Chinese police service stations. You gotta love the name, right? Service stations that operate in 53 countries, including in major cities in the United States. The lengthy report documenting this said very simply that the purpose of these stations was, quote, to control the diaspora abroad. Let me conclude by a caution about why this is important, not just at the individual level, in other words, individual people and families, but at the institutional level as well. It is tragic, it is immoral for the Chinese Communist Party and other authoritarian regimes, such as Russia, to harass, attack, and even assassinate individual critics, dissidents, and minorities abroad. But what is much more insidious is the powerful use of persuasion, bribery, blackmail, coercion, intimidation, and other activities to get government officials in foreign countries to become co-conspirators in such transnational oppression. The CCP seeks to get government officials to violate international covenants by detaining these asylum seekers, looking the other way when they're harassed, and blocking their efforts to achieve legal status with the ultimate goal, in most cases, of deporting them back to China and silencing them. And we know that if they're deported and returned, then they often disappear into China's vast prison network. Unfortunately, when governments violate international norms, as we've seen with China and Russia and other so-called BRICS, it sends a signal to the second and the third tiers of authoritarian states that they, too, are free to turn their back on their fundamental responsibility to care and protect for their own citizens, not to mention all of the human rights commitments that they have signed on to, such as the legally binding International Covenant of Civil and Political Rights. In conclusion, I was in Europe last week, and they were commemorating May 25th, their International Day for the heroes who stood up against totalitarianism. As we think about the issues that we've discussed today, let's hope that we can end these totalitarian ideologies and these evil practices so that the next generation needs fewer such heroes. Thank you.
Now I'd like to invite to speak Dr. Terri Marsh. She's the Executive Director and Senior Litigation Partner of the Human Rights Law Foundation. And I might add, responsible and probably one of the people that's most knowledgeable in terms of legal action related to Falun Gong today. So, Dr. Marsh.
So I'd like to dedicate my remarks today to the courageous students and professors.
Just go ahead. I'll adjust it.
Okay. Yeah. Professors who risk liberty and life. And life to change the political landscape of China in 1989, before and during the Tiananmen crackdown. And I know many of these people, and I have learned much from them as moral examples to sort of guide me in my own moral journey. So the short summary of what I'll be saying today, discussing, is that the Chinese Communist Party, which I'll be referring to as the party, engages in terrorist activities against such groups as Falun Gong under 22 U.S.C. Section 2656D2, that is under U.S. law, through its operation of purge campaigns in China. And that much is clear. I co-authored an article with Tong Bao, I think you're all familiar with, and in the Journal of Political Risk, Volume 8, 2020, that sets out the bases for the detailed bases for the argument. What might seem somewhat plausible, and which I raise as a question at the end of the discussion, is whether the recent decision to wipe out Falun Gong outside of China, that is, especially in U.S. soil, is an exportation of the same or similar purge campaign. That is, has the party exported its terrorist activities against Falun Gong in China to suppress Falun Gong on U.S. soil. And I can tell you now that I will make suggestions, but I won't come to a final conclusion to answer the question, although it's an important question and I think needs an answer for certain. So let me just begin with some facts. Some of you may be familiar with these, some of you may not. The party conducts purge, or doujian, which is a Chinese word, one of the few that I know, campaigns against targeted groups every 10 years or so in China, as instructed by Mao during the party's formation. These campaigns and other purge campaigns in China follow the same basic steps. The decision to target a specific group, whatever the group may be, as an enemy is always made by the Chinese Communist Party. Following a positive decision by the party, the group to be targeted is identified with carefully crafted rhetoric, that is lies, cast as truth. During the Cultural Revolution and thereafter, all the instructive documents were issued under the name of the Party Central Committee, and I have most of these documents in case you're interested. The same with the campaigns against the Tiananmen protesters in 1989, the Strike Hard campaign of the 1990s, Falun Gong beginning in 1999 to the present, and of course Uyghurs. In addition, the initiation of the crackdown is signaled and implemented through the use of party language, and especially, as noted, the imperative word doujian, which in this context is best translated as violently suppress. Ho Quinlan, a fairly famous China expert, defines it as unlawfully torture and persecute this group. Then flagship media in China and party ideology journals spread the word to ensure that the designated group is a known party enemy. Special and general security forces, including 610, are mobilized, as are prosecutors and courts, operating under the aegis often of the party's all-powerful political legal committee plaque to identify, round up, arbitrarily detain, torture individual members of the religious group, or the group. I'm not just speaking about Falun Gong now. The ideal is to force these so-called enemies to renounce their group identity and beliefs. The final step is what is referred to as Zhanghua, I don't know if I'm pronouncing that correctly, or forced conversion, which includes torture, and the idea is to torture people until they finally say that what they actually believe is evil or not what they actually believe. And those who refuse to be converted are subjected to ever-increasing violence or death. As a former party agent disclosed to me, these violent purges are largely clandestine. Indeed, the PRC, on every case that I have filed, and there have been many on behalf of Falun Gong and other dissidents, the party categorically denies that it tortures anyone, which is kind of mind-boggling, since torture seems to be the favorite tool of CCP suppression. With respect to the purge campaign against Falun Gong in China, which I've also spent a long time studying, there's been an emphasis on demonizing the spiritual founder and leader of the religion, that is Li Hongzhi, in ways that are absurd and counterfactual. Indeed, the religious founder has been demonized as a criminal, a state enemy, and the like, without any evidence or any basis in fact. As somebody else once told me, if the party says the sun is the moon, one will be subjected to severe penalties if one argues otherwise. As many have observed, truth is produced in China and is totally unrelated to demonstrable facts or evidence. And so in the article that I published with Tang Bao, we argue that these purge campaigns fall clearly within the definition of terrorism. How am I doing with time? Because I can...
Probably need to finish soon.
Okay. So I would just refer you to the article that we wrote together, which shows quite clearly that this Doujian campaign or purge in China comports with the elements of 22 U.S.C. 2656 FD2 definition of terrorist activities. And so the question that I pose is whether the party is now conducting the same purge terrorist campaign against Falun Gong on U.S. soil. It strikes me as a significant question, and perhaps the answer is yes, they are. In support of plausibility, I would note that the mainstream media in the United States, just like flagship media in China, have been used to demonize the religion, its adherents, and especially its founder, and in ways that trample on what I would call the constituents of our humanity, truth, compassion, and tolerance. What is especially difficult for me as a Falun Gong believer is the focus on Li Hongzhi, the founder, who has provided people with a chance to cultivate, as one does in many Eastern religions. This is not some weird whatever. This is a very traditional way of cultivating in order to reach enlightenment, and it requires assimilating to the principles of compassion in addition to tolerance. What could be wrong with that? I would add that one of the Times reporters father has ties with the United Front, but I really don't want to say that that's conclusive. That could just be coincidental or accidental. Of course, the attacks on Li Hongzhi are baseless here as they are in China. The legal system is also being used. I mean, in China, you have the media and the legal system being used to round up, torture, organ harvest, whatever, Falun Gong. And so too here, there have been quite a few cases that I'm involved with that do the same thing. They are based on propaganda, lies, inaccuracies, in order to make it seem that this criminal conduct at Shen Yun or elsewhere in the Falun Gong community. And I don't need to conclude because I think my points are pretty clear. So thank you very much, and thank you for your comments about Cisco, because thanks to Piero, one of my favorite people, and Chris Smith, who submitted an amicus congressional brief to the Supreme Court, our case against Cisco is still happening. So thank you.
So, to add a little color to what Dr. Marsh just spoke about, we have Mark Yang. He is He's a researcher and advocacy officer at the Falun Dafa Information Center to kind of build out what exactly is happening.
Hi, good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. It is a pleasure to speak here today. So the Falun Dafa Information Center, or the FDI, is a nonprofit that works to give voices to millions of Falun Gong practitioners that are being persecuted by the CCP. So from our research, the transnational repression targeting the Shen Yun performing arts is an important case study that really showcases the CCP's full societal and orchestrated tactics against its critics in the United States. For those unfamiliar, Shen Yun Performing Arts is an American cultural institution based in New York, founded in 2006 by elite artists who practice Falun Gong. And Shen Yun's mission is to revive the traditional, divinely inspired culture, the Chinese culture, and revive them without any communist influence. And also, out of 20 programs, out of 20 pieces in the program, Shen Yun also has 2 pieces that artistically depict the persecution of Falun Dafa so that it can raise awareness. And now Shen Yun has grown from 1 company to now 8 equally sized companies that tour around the world simultaneously. And it is able to reach over 200 cities and over 1 million live audiences every single year. So I think it's probably one of the largest performing arts group in the world right now. And actually, a 2023 Washington Post article compared Shen Yun to the many cultural diplomacy arts programs that the State Department was initiating during the Cold War era. Actually, this is due to Shen Yun's ability to really counter CCP's soft power influences on a very global scale. And it is using China's own culture, and it is doing so without taking a single penny from the American taxpayers. And the vision of a China without communism as depicted in Shen Yun's shows, and the constant exposure of the CCP's human rights abuses seem to really deeply unsettle the regime. And ever since Shen Yun's founding, the CCP has employed continuous transnational repression to undermine the company. From 2006 to 2024, the FDI documented over 130 attempts to sabotage Shen Yun's shows, and these include through cyber attacks, slashing bus tires, and pressuring theaters to cancel performances through CCP's consulates and embassies. However, since 2024, we are seeing a drastic escalation of these transnational repressions, and these are in terms of scale, severity, and complexity of these efforts. From 2024 to May 2025, so just a little over a year, the FDI documented over 110 cases worldwide, with many concentrated in the United States. And a significant number of these incidences involved bomb threats and mass shooting threats targeting theaters that host Shen Yun. And this is a picture of those threats that you would see that these theaters would receive. And as noted by Piero earlier, right, this happened right here on the home front in Washington D.C. At the Kennedy Center, where the center has to evacuate due to the bomb threats targeting Shen Yun performers, and later on, Shen Yun also have to incur costs for those heightened security measures. And of course, no bombs were found, but as this is typical with all of these threats, but these really serve as a scare tactic to disrupt Shen Yun's operations, to intimidate performers, and of course, deter audience members from seeing the show. And additionally, threats of arson, rape, mass shootings, and car accidents were directed at Shen Yun's headquarters in New York. Similar threats have even been extended to members of Congress that ever voiced support for Falun Gong and Shen Yun. And actually in March, Taiwanese authorities, they were able to trace the threats targeting Shen Yun in Taiwan. You know, this is a very global target, global cooperation by the CCP, and they were able to trace it to a Huawei facility in Xi'an, China. And this is according to a Liberty Times report, which is one of the largest news outlets in Taiwan. And beyond these terrorist threats, we're also noticing the CCP's tactics are growing increasingly sophisticated. So in 2024, the Department of Justice announced that 2 CCP agents were sentenced for attempting to bribe an IRS official to revoke Shen Yun's nonprofit status. And this is just a blatant attempt to weaponize the IRS whistleblower program to silence its critics. And a leaked document also revealed that the CCP's Ministry of Public Security and Ministry of State Security, so these are China's equivalents of the FBI and the CIA, and they actually operate a joint office for combating Falun Gong in North America. And this functions very similarly to those secret police stations that you see in the news, but this one specifically targets Falun Gong. As Professor袁红冰described earlier, this escalation that we are seeing right now is a result of a top-down decision. So So leaked information indicates that Xi Jinping himself ordered these disinformation campaigns and lawfare against Falun Gong practitioners, and unfortunately we are really witnessing these tactics being unfolded right now. So since August 2024, the New York Times has published 12 articles portraying Shen Yun in a very negative light. And these are often was distorted, inaccurate, and misleading information that really lack critical context too. So these articles relied heavily on a small group of dissatisfied performers, former performers, and mind you, right, with any large organization, this is bound to happen, right? It's very common. But the problem here is that the New York Times never really gave voice to the wide majority of performers that are very happy with their experiences. So actually, there are over 750 former and current performers and over 800 family members that signed a petition denouncing the New York Times coverage as a gross distortion and false narratives about their work, faith, and way of life. Oops, sorry. The lead reporter of the articles is a Chinese American. And according to a bio published by a CCP-affiliated website, the reporter's father was reportedly listed as an honorary director of a United Front organization. And United Front are CCP strategy to influence and coerce perceived enemies through co-opting tactics. And after the bio gained attention online after the Times article being published, it was quickly removed by the CCP in September 2024. The New York Times articles were also amplified by Chinese bots on social media. They actually made the Chinese version of the main hit piece targeting Shen Yun the most shared New York Times article on X in 2024. And X has been removing thousands of these fake accounts since March. So now let's kind of shift gears and talk about the lawfare. And there's one former dancer who spoke highly of her experiences after leaving the company, and she even tried to rejoin. But however, she drastically changed her stance after visiting Beijing and collaborating with the Beijing Dance Academy, which is an institution run by the CCP and is also one of Shen Yun's few global competitors. She subsequently filed a civil lawsuit against Shen Yun last November, and she hired some prominent and very costly U.S. law firms. Flynn Kahn, a senior China watcher in Politico, he recognized this for what it was immediately. And in an X post about the New York Times coverage of the lawsuit, he wrote, here I quote, "This is a propaganda coup for Beijing's multi-decade propaganda war against Falun Gong," end of quote. And unfortunately, lawfare is nothing new to Shen Yun. In 2021, an American who lived in China for 15 years, he came back to the United States and established an environmental firm. And the firm repeatedly filed frivolous lawsuits, environmental lawsuits, against Shen Yun's New York headquarters. And all of these cases, they were eventually dismissed, but and also with the final one in 2024, dismissed with prejudice, meaning it cannot be filed on the same grounds again. But however, the damage is already down. Local newspapers, they will report the lawsuits when they're filed, and when they get dismissed, they won't really report that. So these are really fueling a lot of suspicions and tensions among the local communities, and they're really incurring real reputational harm while forcing a significant amount of legal costs to Shen Yun. In 2024, the House Select Committee on CCP held a hearing titled "How the CCP Uses the Law to Silence Its Critics and Enforce Its Rule." And they really covered how lawfare is increasingly being utilized by the CCP in foreign countries. Yeah. Well, I guess I'll just... Do you have any backup?
Someone just pulled the fire alarm on the forum. Is this kind of a case in point, perhaps? That was heard. So what I just said without having the mic on is it seems like the fire alarm was pulled in this building as perhaps a case in point to what's being discussed at exactly this moment. I hope that it's not actually a fire, but
we should probably comply with.
as the congressional staffer here is suggesting that we should actually probably leave.
We should. Let me see if there's a drill, but I think we should probably comply, which probably means going to the we should probably leave the room and go to the stairwell. I think that's the protocol. So.
With any luck, this will end shortly and we can come back. Let's see what happens. Thank you for being with us.
This is what you guys live with.
us. There was a false fire alarm scare. Again, kind of a case in point to the type of activities. I don't know who pulled the alarm. Now, I don't know what that is. But it's like a different alarm. Okay. We're being told to evacuate the building. So we'll see you back another time, folks. Thank you for joining us. Given that there's 10 minutes left in our time now,